Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time as always. I'm excited for us to get started on this third installment of our four-part series. Um, if you've missed any of our previous sessions, we will be repeating all four installments two more times with sessions each Friday throughout the months of August and September. My name is Rebecca Kuhn. I am a business analyst with Workflow Concepts, and we're gonna be your host today, along with Cisco. A little bit about our company, Workflow Concepts. We are a team of call center professionals with design experience in designing, staffing, managing, and operating call centers for over 20 years. Our company's been doing this. We work with customers to help enhance their UCCX investment and to improve the customer journey and maximize the utilization of UCCX. We're a pretty unique team that knows what it's like to be in the contact center world, and we want to share some of our expertise with you today, as we have had in our previous weeks. Um, I just want to cover a couple of things for housekeeping purposes. As you see on our screen now, we started promptly at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am recording our presentation. I have made these recordings available via Cisco, who I believe will be the one distributing it to the list of attendees, along with the collateral that we've put together, the presentations themselves. Your phone is muted. We ask that you keep your phone on mute, please. And if you switch to a cell phone during the presentation, please make sure your cell phone is also on mute. Um, that will help us to respect everybody else's time and be courteous throughout the presentation to our presenter. Um, and I just want to encourage you all that questions are appreciated and we want to hear from you. So today's an exciting presentation about reports and digging into some of these reports. So I'm sure a lot of you are going to have questions. Please use that chat in the WebEx to chat me. I will collect all the questions along with who asked them. And at the end of the presentation, I will go through in our Q&A and read through those questions and retrieve the answers from our presenter. So just don't hesitate to ask the question. If it's something I can answer quickly, I will, but otherwise I'll hold all questions to be read till the end. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Brittany Erskine, who is another business analyst with Work Concepts, and she's going to be our presenter for today's session. So with that, Brittany, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Let me just move over the slide here. So I want to thank you again for joining this afternoon, this morning, this evening, whatever time it is where you are. As Rebecca mentioned, this is week 3, so session number 3. We are going to be capturing today, as best we can, CSQ reporting details. Excuse me. With that, we will recap. Just move forward. We will recap the previous 2 weeks just so that we're all on the same page. We're starting off on a good, strong footing. And then we're going to be talking about CSQ reporting details. And what I mean by that is, what are the CSQ-based reports that we are talking about? Some of them we have mentioned in previous sessions. And we will also be talking about summary reports, detail reports. There's differences in those, but we'll get into more of that. So just a high-level recap here for everyone. The first session, we talked about architecture. CUIC, of course, which is what the series is about, is driven by the UCCX architecture, UCCX being the communications platform that allows for the distribution of CSQ or ACD calls to skilled resources. We mentioned in that session that there are different levels of reporting based on this architecture, those being system level reports versus application level reports, and then to CSQ and agent-based reports. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking about the CSQ level of reporting, and next week, with week 4, we'll be talking about agent-based reporting. Specific fields something we mentioned in our first session here, specific fields have different definitions, and understanding the data that we see is defined by specific scripting, which is a Cisco coding language that allows for inbound calls to route to our agents. So high-level architecture, basically to summarize that, is that there are a number of different reports and they all have different meanings, which is why we're taking the time today to explain CSQ-based reports and why we separate them from maybe reports we've talked about in previous weeks being application-based reports, and maybe, different than what we're talking about next week in agent-based reports, because they all have different reasons for being written the way that they are, which is of course why we have such such strong talking points for this week, in some of these really key reports that we'll see. In week 2, we talked about CSQ. I'm sorry, CUIC details. When I say that, we did a deep dive kind of demo. We walked through the navigation and talked through the different options available through CUIC, Cisco Unified Intelligence Center. We discussed dashboards, the permissions, rights required to view them, to create them. We talked through where to find the necessary reports mentioned in our, the reports that we mentioned in week 1, reports that we'll be going over today and next week. And we also talked through the details on how to edit stock reports in the CUIC interface. So if you did miss those two, per what Rebecca said in the beginning of this, is that those video recordings will be made available. Or if you'd like to come on and check out that in person, we do have a few more series that will go over the same information in the weeks to come. So week 3. Right, week 3, we're going to be focused on some of the more commonly used CSQ-based reports, everything from the stock reports available, and we'll kind of talk through each of them, not each of them per se, but each of the key reports, and just some that I recommend, of course, and that's based on your role and why you're looking for what you're looking for, and maybe depending on what you're looking for. So we'll talk through those, some key KPIs that you may be looking for and maybe that are confusing. We'll be able to talk through some of those. Through that, we're also going to discuss the difference between a detail level report, which would have a record by record view of an incoming call. And we're also going to talk about how that differs from a summary level report. And then, of course, we're going to include a few one-offs, a couple of key reports that I find very, very helpful that I think deserve some spotlight. So with that being said, we have a screenshot here of CUIC directly. And what I've done here is I've gone through and I've navigated through reports, stock, unified CCX historical, and inbound. So here I have noted the different reports that we'll be talking about today. And of course, it's important to note, as mentioned on the last slide, that we have different types of CSQ reports, right? I keep mentioning summary versus detail. We have a couple of summary-based reports here. We have some detail-based reports, and then we have a couple of the one-offs here. Our summary reports are going to be the contact service queue activity by CSQ. We also have that contact service activity report by interval. We have the CSQ call distribution summary, and then we're going to go on to talk about the infamous CCDR report as it pertains to CUIC. There's a similar report in another application within the whole UC platform that is also known as CCDR, that through Call Manager, but we're going to be talking about how it pertains to CUIC here with what we need to see. There's also a detailed call CSQ agent report, which is a CSQ-based report that has agent information on it. And then we have a couple others that I'd really like to talk through, and that's the CSQ agent summary report, and more of an agent report here, but really to give us a good understanding. It's a key report and it's pretty new. So it's kind of that special bonus that I'd like to go through at the end, and that is the reason report by reason grouping. And we'll go over why those are so special. So the first report that we're going to talk through has a couple of really key points that I want to mention here. But overall, what I really want to do for this session is talk through these reports and go through the actual definitions of the report, which will lead us to why these reports were created. Here you have a CSQ activity report by CSQ, right? Which means that we have selected which report or which CSQ we want to look at. It presents a summary of calls that are presented, right? So how many presented, how many handled, how many abandoned. The important thing to note about this is that this report, as mentioned in our first session here when we were talking through the difference between calls handled by other and calls that are DQ'd, right? This is an important report for that specifically. And just to highlight back, that was, we had mentioned, and something that to keep in mind when you are running this report is that those two fields can differ based on your specific scripting. And just to kind of highlight scripting is the coding language that really tells calls what to do on the back end, right, before they get presented to an agent. So, if you didn't catch that, definitely recommend keeping or taking a look at that presentation because it does give a little bit more information on it. But this report is one that we were talking about when we went over that topic in how you can see what number of calls presented to the CSQ were DQ'd, right? Maybe they went to a different application, or maybe they went to a voicemail. Whatever that reason is, using that specific DQ step versus maybe a call that was handled by another workflow. And that's really what this report includes, is that differentiator there. And again, I will reiterate, this is very dependent on your environment and how your environment is configured. So I do want to kind of make mention with that. So this is a really good report for contact center management and supervisors, okay, because it does, like I said, provide the basic KPIs, presented versus handled. We mentioned calls handled by other and DQ'd. The other important piece that I want to talk about is average speed of answer. Okay, and as you're looking at my screenshots, I do want to point out that this is a lab environment that I have taken our screenshots from. So please don't judge us too harshly on our metrics here. It is a demo environment. So what I want to go back to is average speed of answer. A lot of the times we see average speed of answer, or ASA, gets confused with average queue time. Okay, and I want to point out the difference between these two. A lot of the times you will see that they are or can be very similar. Here we have a very big discrepancy, and I want to make sure that we understand why. Okay, so average speed of answer is defined as total queue time divided by calls handled. And that's absolutely critical, because if we are looking at average queue time, our average queue time includes abandoned calls. So it's looking at overall, what's the big picture? How long on average are all of the calls presented? How long is it taking for them to be, how long are they waiting there, right? Queue time, how long are they queuing for? Versus average speed of answer, it's in the actual title itself. How long is it taking for the calls that are handled to be answered on average? So that's a very, very big point, and I want to make sure that we all understand that ASA does not include abandoned calls. That's huge, and we've run into this multiple times. It is a great metric to use, but I just want to make sure that we are talking about the fact that it should not be confused with average queue time. So if you're looking at, as a contact center manager or supervisor, the overall picture, and you want to see, okay, how long are people waiting? Regardless of whether they're handled or abandoned, how long are they waiting? That's queue time. Right? If you're looking for, okay, how long did it take for this person to be handled? That's more of an ASA. So filter criteria with this one, we are looking at date, time, CSQ name, and CSQ type. Okay, so is it it CSQA? Is it CSQB? It's fairly straightforward as far as the filter options that we have. Okay. The next one that we have to talk about is contact service queue activity by interval. Okay, this presents information about service levels, which is another great KPI for contact center management and supervisors. What is my service level? Service level being, configured at the CSQ level at the admin side of the house. How many calls, right? What percentage of calls are being answered within how many seconds? That's really what our service level is. And most of you are probably very familiar with that and very strict on your adherence to that. This is a good report because it does give you that service level. But it also presents calls presented, calls handled, abandoned, DQ'd within a certain interval. And that's where this is a really strong tool, and which is why I've chosen to add it here. Is that not only can we look at an entire report range defined by, okay, I want to look at yesterday, and I just want to look at open to close, 8 to 5, whatever that may be. Okay, out of 8 to 5, what was my service level? Was my calls presented? Here on this screenshot, for example, I am looking at an interval of 60 minutes, which means that I am looking at information and my KPIs by the hour. Meaning if I want to see how we handled things or how the contact center was performing at maybe my busiest hour in the day, this is where I would go. And I would say, okay, well, what was my service level throughout the lunch hour or throughout the afternoon break? Alternatively, you can actually figure out what your busy hour is through using a report like this, and again, depending on the CSQ that you're looking at. And I want to point out this is a summary report. So as you can see here, it's not really giving us a call by call list of information, right? So I can't see customer A versus customer B. I'm looking at one CSQ here. I'm looking at CSQ demo, which is giving me, of course, I had 4 calls handled within my service level, at the lunch clock hour versus 7 calls presented, and so this really includes those specific KPIs that we might be looking at. So again, really great for contact center management and supervisors. And one of the things that I really love about this as well is that it gives you the percentages as well, which I think is great. And again, keep in mind we have some lab demo information here as we're looking at the screen. Okay, so this one here I do have on my short list. I do have it added to my favorite when I go in and look at some of the reports for our company or our customers. Next, we're going to look at, and this is one of my favorite reports because it gives us something very specific, and it cuts down on the amount of legwork I have to do maybe at a detail level to get a certain piece of information. So this one here is the contact service queue activity call distribution summary, which is a mouthful. It's a long title, but we can call it the distribution summary for short. And what this does is it presents the number and percentage of calls handled within configurable time intervals. So if we look at the filter criteria on this one, you're going to see it's asking you to select 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, or 60 seconds. I have this set for 15 seconds. So basically what I'm looking at here is first off, I'm looking at a CSQ, right? I'm looking at the CSQ, and then if I go over here, I do want to point some things out. Okay, total calls presented with queue time. So this is going to give me, right, not only how many handled calls I have, but within what time frame were they handled, right? So if they're handled within the first 15 seconds, here I can see 57.89% of my calls that were handled within 15 seconds. Here, right, I can tell that 2 of my calls were handled between 15 and 30 seconds. And the way that I get that, right, because you're like, where's the 2? Okay, so if you look at this here, it's saying 0 to 30 seconds. So if I look at that and I take away the first 15 seconds, which I know is 11, then 2 of those calls out of the 13 were presented from 15 to 30. So overall, in the first 30 seconds, 68.42% of my calls were handled within that 30 seconds, and so on and so forth. So you get here. So out of 19 calls handled, 73.68 of those calls were handled within the first 30 seconds, right, of their wait time, which I think is a really strong metric. What I prefer to look at here is not necessarily the calls with handle time, is the abandon. And I think this gives us a little bit better of an understanding of our abandon metric, especially if you have an anomaly, right? And let's say that one day you have, an abandoned number that's a little bit higher than normal, or you've always had a number and you think I just don't understand why we have this. This is a really good report, I think, not only for customer or for contact center management and supervisors, but also for maybe an admin that wants to go and look at, well, we're talking about a redesign, we're talking about looking into how our menu structure is. This is going to give you a really good idea of how soon are people abandoning before they get in, right? We have a service level that will show us, how quickly are we answering these calls, or if we're in adherence to that. But one of the other things that I think we should really be aware of is, well, great, you had 27 calls abandoned, but at what point are they abandoning? Are they sitting in your queue for, 10 minutes and then hanging up? Or like us, are 85% of those calls that have abandoning within the first 15 seconds of that queue? Okay, so that gives us a really good understanding. Is our customer base and our demographic expecting to be answered within 15 seconds? Is there maybe something that we should look at? Do we need better wording? And that kind of goes back into analyzing the data that you see, but it gives you a really good understanding of how long are people waiting. And then you can start to ask those questions. Why are they waiting that long? And maybe how do we get them to wait longer if we just can't answer them within 15 seconds? Those are some of the questions that this specific report will help you kind of get to. But that's why I've pointed it out here as being a really strong CSQ-based report, is that you may have one CSQ with a really high percentage of abandoned within 15 seconds, but your other CSQs may be, okay, they're waiting for 30, they're waiting for 60, they're waiting for, longer than that even, if that's what we find. But here is a really good understanding, and you don't have to pour through, record by record each specific abandoned call and how long they're waiting on the call for. So I think it's a really great report for that. And again, this is another one that I have favorited in our actual environment. And when I work with customers, this is one that I use quite frequently. So those are the few that I use for CSQ summary reports. When I'm looking at those base KPI metrics, right, I'm going to look at how many calls presented. Out of those calls presented, how many handled? That's great. If we have a high handled percentage, everything's on track. I don't really need to investigate further. But again, from a CSQ perspective, I also want to know what's my percent abandoned, right? How long are people waiting? I do want to look at ASA, but I also want to keep in mind, right, we mentioned that ASA is handled calls only. So I do want to keep in mind, I want to look at my average queue time. And then we can get into more of those details, but that's really going to give me my first look. And those are the reports here that we've talked about so far that I use to get that information. The next report that we have here is the detailed call by call CCDR report. This is such a strong tool. I would recommend this be more of a management admin report. The reason being is that it is a detail level report. And when I say detail level report, it's going to give you a call by call or session by session understanding of a call leg and its journey. And I want to be more specific when I say call leg, because this isn't just a single call start to finish. Okay, and I'm going to refer back to when we're looking at this report. Specifically, I'm going to refer back to our first session if you were part of it. And we talked about architecture. And within our architecture, we talked about having different applications in some scenarios where I can have application A. And let's just say, right, for talking points here, because we're looking at this slide, we're not looking at session one. Let's say that we have our main application, and then we have a main menu, and it says press 2 for Spanish. Right? If I press 2 for Spanish, it's going to send me to another application. And again, keep in mind that's not always how this works, but let's say that that's the case, right? A call comes in, it goes to application, the main menu. I press option 2 for Spanish, it goes to a Spanish application. What we would see in this report specifically, okay, if I go over to node, session ID, and sequence, is each call leg is going to be marked with a sequence number. So the first call leg would be represented by that initial call coming in to the main menu. The second I hit option 2, that's starting a new call leg because it's going to a different application. So it would be marked here as -1 in the sequence instead of -2. So I don't have a screenshot of that here, but for example, if you can take a look, the session ID 001-0, if this were to go to Spanish application after, it would be 001-1. Okay, so that's what I mean by call leg. So again, not necessarily the entire call cradle to grave in one record line, but each call leg. So there's a few different things to note when reading this report. Before we get into that, I want to talk about why you would use this report. And really, I have used this report personally for, I've used it for investigative purposes. I have used it as a application-based report to see, okay, how out of, how many calls here, how many calls went to the Spanish application after that. Okay, I've been able to do that really deep dive, which is why I would say this is more of a management admin, is because it's not necessarily, I know this is a CSQ based session, it's not necessarily a CSQ based report. The reason I've chosen to include it in this conversation today is because it does give us CSQ information. So we talked about reporting on different levels. Okay, I've mentioned the word application many times. This is an application-based report, meaning I can, in the filter criteria, search by application. Okay, application name comes up over here, meaning if I wanted to look at just main menu application versus my Spanish application or my Russian application, whatever it may be, that I have there as a secondary application, I can look at all of them. I can look at one of them. It's really dependent on what you're looking to see. But again, the reason I would use this is varied greatly. One of the things I would not, and I do want to make sure this is a point, very clear point, use this summaries, right? This is not to be used as a CSQ summary report because first off, it does not give you the name of the CSQ that you're transferring to or that you're ultimately ending up in. You do have destination information as to where the call lands, but again, it's not really, used as a CSQ summary report. So for example, I would not go to the bottom of this column here and say, okay, equals sum of, I wouldn't do calculations at the CSQ level based on this report. This more so is a detail level report where I would look at other information such as, maybe I know that there's one queue in demo application. So I would look at, what's the talk time with this application? What's the hold time? What's the work time? I would look at those metrics, but really what I'm looking for is what's the journey? Okay, what's the journey to each of these call legs, and it gives you that understanding. You can go up and look up a specific call that came in, which is more so what I use this for than anything, is somebody would message me, right? They send me an email. Let's say, Brittany, can you find, 207-558-8601, right? Can you see how many times they called into UCCX? And I mentioned that UCCX because there's two different ways that you can investigate information at the call level, and that is one through Call Manager, which is again another part of the UC platform, but the one that we're focused on and the one that we're looking at here in CUIC and with the CCDR report is the is through UCCX, and that would be a call that came into the call center specifically, right? A distributed call. And I want to make sure that's clear as well, because that's often something that is confused. You can look at certain things at both levels. This is, again, a great investigative tool for the UCCX platform, which in the definition itself, right, it's looking for contact call detail record, right, which is CCDR, and it's looking for information stored in the UCCX database. Okay, it has contact routing, agent connection details, and again, it's reported at each leg of the call. So to talk a little bit more about what this report gives us, okay, contact. What is the contact type? Okay, was it an incoming? Was it outgoing? Was it internal, a redirect, or transfer? When you see these numbers, each of those numbers represents a different contact type. And one of the really key things about reading this report is becoming very familiar with the contact types, what the disposition numbers mean. And you may be sitting there and you may be saying, well, that's great. I've used this a million times and I have it all memorized. If you're like me and you don't have such a strong memory, short-term or long-term, the help, the little question mark on the toolbar of each of the reports will give you these definitions. So if you're looking at this and you're trying to analyze that data, I would absolutely refer you to that little question mark of the tools. It's going to tell you what type 1 means versus type 2 and type 3 and so on and so forth. The other thing here is disposition. That tool will give you a definition of the disposition here. So was it handled? Was it abandoned? Was it aborted? Was it rejected? And that gets into a different conversation, but it'll give you those metrics, right? And again, it's a little bit tough to read here, being that it's 1s and 2s, but that tool of help is going to be mission critical for this report here. Originator, again, gives you the type, destination, where did it go, what type of destination, was it an agent desk, was it a queue, was it an application? So it gives you that information. Called number, okay, what is the number that was dialed originally by the caller, right? What number did I enter into my phone? Original called number, okay, this kind of lets us know. Right here, I can see that the original called number and the called number matches, right? So original called number, what was the called number of this sequence? Okay, that's important to know. And then application name here as well. And then, of course, queue time, talk time, hold time, we know what those are, but that would be pertaining to that individual record. So here I can see that this call did go to queue versus here, which means that it did not go to queue. Okay, so we have kind of differences here. The other thing I can tell from this call leg, right? So here it went to queue for 11 seconds and there's no talk time. Okay, versus a talk time here after the queue. Excuse me, tickle in my throat there. So this is a really good investigative report. Again, this is not something that I would say as a supervisor or just a manager for regular reporting. And again, it really depends on what you're looking for. You may find this extremely helpful and it may fit exactly what you're looking for, but really, I use this more as an investigative tool. So with this one, there's a lot that you can do with it. It's a great tool. It's on my favorites list. I think we've all got that by now. Next report here is the detailed call CSQ agent report. This is, I think, probably one of my favorites. Again, it is a detailed report. It is a CSQ based. You can also sort by application because it's going to give you, of course, application name here, but it also gives you CSQ name, queue time, the agent name. So it gives you that real picture of that call leg as it pertains to more detail at the end user level. So what CSQ did it go to? Not just did it go to a queue like we saw in the CCDR report, but what queue did it go to? Okay, it queued for 2 seconds and then it went to an agent, but what agent did it go to? Right? What's the ring time, talk time, work time associated with it? So this is truly more, I guess, less of an investigative report and more of a management supervisor report. So if you were looking at the previous report, you're like, well, it has some information, but it looks a little bit, cumbersome. Keep in mind, it's more of an investigative report than it is kind of a picture viewing and analyzing report. It's this one here. I would recommend for contact center management supervisors that need to see that detail level report. It does also give you contact disposition, right? And that's going to be was it handled or was it abandoned? Okay, it gives you the original calling number, the DN, the called number. So those two important details from the previous report we looked at, but in a more of a digestible format, I think, for for a different level of user. So literally defined as called information about the contact service queue that a call was routed to and the agent that it handled. So it's a lot simpler of a view, I think, but still gives you the detailed information that you're looking at. One of the things I really like about this report is that I can pull it for the entire day, okay, depending on the level of records I have, because we all know that 8,000 line limit. It is a detail level report, but I can look at it for the day. I can look at everything, but I can also, which is great, pare it down by the called number, okay? So if it called 1-800-567 versus 568, right? Those are my two different numbers. I can look at that, and then I can look at by calling number, who is calling me. So if you have a number that's calling you more than once and you want to investigate it, you can do that. You can look at it by application, contact type, okay, originator, destination type. You can also look at it, which I think is great, by the CSQ, right? So this is where it becomes more of a CSQ-based report, and also filter it down by agent as well. So again, this is a really good tool, but and I've said that for all of them, right? I get super excited about reporting, but the reason here, I mean, I've included all of my favorites. This one is it's excellent for the management supervisors that need that detail level of a call by call, or I guess a call leg detail. With that, I'm going to mention two of my one-offs. The first one being the CSQ agent summary, because we have agent and CSQ in the same, but it's also a summary. And then we also have the reason grouping, which I'll go over. This one here, the CSQ agent summary, it presents calls about, information about calls that are handled in each CSQ for each agent. This is I can't say enough good things about this report. So one of the things we look at when we're looking at information between a CSQ report and an agent report is that a lot of the times they don't line up, right? And it's one of the things I speak to a lot of people about is you can't necessarily take an agent total calls presented and compare it with total calls presented to a CSQ, mostly because you have calls that may go to another agent, right? You can have agent A is presented with 4 calls, but only answers 3. Well, that call rolls over to the next agent and becomes another presented call. So if you're looking at presented to the CSQ, that call is not presented to the CSQ more than once. So that's where I say you can't really compare those two numbers, but really to get a great idea of agent-specific information, but at the CSQ level. And what I mean by this is I have 3 different CSQs in my screenshot. Okay. I also have calls handled, but I also have agent name. So here I'm going to be able to see that in demo, David handled 5 calls, but with support, he only handled 1. Okay. So this is where it's a great view of it's a CSQ based report because it's giving me, okay, what was handled at the demo level, what's the talk time for this queue, but at the agent level, right? So how is David performing in use case, right? How is David performing with his new duties as having the demo skill versus a support skill which he's had all along, right? And a way of looking at that is what's his talk time? What's his talk time comparatively with the rest of the team in that CSQ? So, I mean, this gives you a really good picture of how agents are performing at the CSQ level, but also how's the CSQ performing, right? How many times do people have to put these calls on hold? What's the average talk time of this CSQ, right? And why is it so much higher than support, right? And of course, we're looking at average talk time here. And again, please keep in mind, this is demo information. But it gives you that high level picture of having both of those pieces of information in one view, which I think is absolutely critical because we can't look at data as supervisors and management staff through a straw. We can't say it's black and white. We can't say that, okay, my CSQs are doing great, but over here it looks like my agents are struggling. We have to look at it in a holistic manner. And being that for the longest time we've looked at things in black and white, and it's either CSQ or agent. This is a really good report, and the previous one that we looked at as well, of giving you that holistic view of not only how is the CSQ performing, but how are the agents performing, right, at that level. One of the key metrics here is ring no answer, that dirty word in a call center, RNA, RONA, whatever you might call it. It's going to give you the ring no answer metric for the agent by CSQ, which will give you a really good understanding of some information coming in as well. So I have one more to talk through here before we get to questions, and I cannot wait to answer some of your questions here. I've seen a couple pop up that hopefully we'll get to. Please keep in mind that you can send anything to Rebecca, the moderator. She will be able to kind of gather those up at the end, and we'll be able to talk through all of them. So bear with me for one more report here. This is kind of, I saved the best for last. When it comes to this report, I guiltily put it in here. It's not necessarily a CSQ specific report. But I think it's really important to talk through because it's one that it's a fairly new recent ad, and it's going to give you total time that each agent spent in the not ready state. And you may be saying, okay, well, I already have that, and I already know a report for that. Well, this, right, drum roll, gives you information on your customized not ready codes, which for years we've looked at it in either the not ready reason code report or the maybe the agent state detail report, and it's given us a code number that we can look at, and you do have that data available to you. You always did. What this report does is it gives you metrics on that report, on that not ready state. But as you can see here, not only does it include some of the stock reports, right, non-ACD busy, but it also has break. Well, we all know that break is not a stock report. And if you don't know, now you know, break is not a stock report code or ready code, right? That's one that we went in and we added. Okay, so is, I don't have another one on there, but break. Break is a perfect example of that's a custom not ready code. And here, because I have it in there, okay, it's giving me my metrics on that report. Okay, right now I have it looking at one agent, which is myself. And again, please don't judge me too harshly. This is lab information. And one of the other great things about this as well is that you can sort by interval length, which if you're looking at my metrics here, is it's quite a large number because it's giving me an entire report range versus you can look at it at the half hour or hour interval. Also pare down it by resource group. You can look at agents specifically. You can look at teams specifically. If you wanted to look at a specific reason code, you can do that. So again, I was really excited to be able to come on and share this report with you because I know that over the past years that I've been working with this product, this has been one of the big asks is, Brittany, I can't see my not ready reason codes. And now I'm thrilled to be able to share this report with people. It really is, it's a great view for, again, contact center management and supervisors. That's what my main focus of today's reports were for. And to really get on and help explain what some of these reports are really built for. This one, use case, right? We have maybe a new employee and I want to look up employee and see how many times they put themselves into the, break status. So are they meeting their adherence? And especially if you don't have one of those, WFM tools that are out there, there's many different ones you have. This report is absolutely critical because it gives you that information without having to go through a detail level report. And it really gives you the information that you can be looking for. So with that, I do want to pull it over to, or just pass the ball back over to Rebecca. I do apologize if I sped through some of them. I have a lot to say about these reports. Like I said, I get really excited about these things. But I'd be very happy to answer some of the questions that you might have at this point. And Rebecca, I think maybe, are you on mute? Or maybe I lost you. Rebecca? Well, let me see if I can see any of them here. Okay, I have one question here from Jessica. Does the aborted disposition mean the agent or caller aborted the call? I'm glad you asked that. That's a really good question. And I assume you mean when I was talking about the CCDR report, there's different dispositions for that call and what happened to that call. Was it handled, answered? And I mentioned aborted, rejected. Aborted would be defined, and I don't have the exact definition in front of you, but that's actually something that would be aborted by the system itself, meaning it would not be connected with the agent or something happened with the system and the system connected that call. So that would be maybe the script threw an exception, or maybe the services went down for whatever reason. So aborted is not something we should see very often. Caution against seeing a large number of those, but aborted would be by the system. And I hope that answered your question. Let's see. What version of, and this was a question from Jim, what version of CUIC added the reason report by reason grouping report? Okay. I want to say 11.6. I know for a fact it's in 12. I'm almost positive it ended up in 6, but I could definitely get back to you with a hard answer on that. I will write it down for a parking lot. Okay, and someone sent me a private question. Please put those out to either Rebecca or the group. See, this is from Y. Which reports would be good to show who abandoned caller versus agent? And then to add on to that, this one may be for next week. Okay, but let's answer that first one. Caller versus agent is very difficult to report on in CUIC. It's something that we've had asked a lot. And what I want to say with that is it's difficult to see that because after the call is taken by the agent, Of course, we still have some reporting capability, but because the CUIC and UCCX will recognize that call as either terminated or not terminated at the agent level. To my knowledge, and what we've been able to discuss here within the team, because we've had this question before, is that level of reporting I would really defer out to a call manager based report, what's happening at the actual phone level. It's difficult to see that, and we haven't found a way to look at that caller hang up versus agent hang up at the CUIC level. The only way we can tell if it's an agent hangup is before it reaches an agent. But we'll be able to talk a little bit more, hopefully, about that next week. That's a great question. Thank you so much for answering. Another one from Y is that this may be from next week. What's the difference between RC1 value versus time and reason code 1 and the not ready reason code report? Have tried using with customized report. Information does not populate. It does work when using time and reason code. I guess I would have to say that's very dependent on your environment. I guess I'd have to see it in front of me, but one of the things about the not ready reason code report that I will say is that it's really mostly designed for stock out of the box Cisco not ready codes. So the 32763, which is, I think it's RNA, if I remember correctly. Haven't seen that one in a while, but it really is meant to give you those codes, and I really can't speak to anything that you have customized. But really the purpose of that report is to give you metrics on those stock Cisco reports, or the Cisco codes, sorry. And I will put it back over to Rebecca, see if you're off now. Okay. Send a quick message over to Rebecca. Oh, she's frozen. Let me see if I can unmute you. I cannot. Okay, so one of the things I will ask is if you do have questions, can you please send them to everyone? That would include me. I have a couple more minutes here, and I would love to get you. So if you sent them privately to Rebecca, please send your questions over to me now. I have one. It is a header under the edit, customizing the stock report. Yeah, that one I would have to take back, and I don't know that I can speak to that specifically. I know that the follow-up question was more information about the not ready reason code report. The difference between RC1 value versus time and reason code 1. I would have to look at the exact definition of those fields in order to answer that for you, and I don't have that in front of me right now. But if you could send that question into info@workflowconcepts.com, I will work to get you the difference between those two field headers. That way, your question does not go unanswered. You're very welcome. Are there any other questions? Again, please send them to the entire group so that I can see them. We are having some technical difficulty on the WebEx. Our moderator is unable to go off mute here for the remainder of this meeting. Please don't hesitate to send your questions over. Okay. Okay, there was a question from the beginning. If any of the presentations are missed, they will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you did miss them, I believe Rebecca, before she was frozen, added that link there. And then it is under CUIC Training Series 2019 is the grouping. Let's see if we have any. Oh, and that was a follow-up question. Will the sessions be added to the Workflow Concepts YouTube channel? after the last one, or should be in there now. I will double check on that. I know that we provided them to Cisco to be shared out, so they should be there soon. They are not already. Okay. Right. Are there any other questions? Good question. The next session is going to go through some of the key agent-based reports. So today we talked through CSQ and what's important to view at the CSQ level, but we all know that it's all fine and dandy to look at our CSQ information, but we also need to look at things from the agent and the team perspective. How is the team performing and how are the agents performing? So we'll be looking at the agent-based reports in the following session. Thank you for your question, Dennis. All right. If there are no other questions, or if you have questions, as I always do after a session, you can always send us questions at info@workflowconcepts.com. Myself, Rebecca, and a few others in my team will be monitoring that as they come in, and we'll be sure to get your questions answered as in a timely fashion. So I want to thank you all very much for your attendance today. It's been a pleasure talking about these reports. As you can all see, I get very excited about them. So tune in next week for the agent-based reports. Thank you.